Apple taking on Google and Microsoft in AI, but for real this time.
Welcome to the All Future Podcast, where we talk all things future tech throughout the week. If you're enjoying this, please consider subscribing. But in the meantime, Matt, what is going on with Apple and AI and them trying to take on Google and Microsoft?
Oh, yeah, it's really happening this time. I feel like we've talked about this like 6 or 7 times. I think this is just one more piece of the puzzle of the Apple AI saga that the Apple rumor mill will constantly be involved in until they actually release something. The biggest news this week is this Apple Ask system. It's a little different than what we've seen from Google and Microsoft and ChatGPT. How is it different?
The difference here is that this is an LLM, but it's supposed to work every time, essentially. And that's because it's trained on a smaller set of data, and it's very specific, and they're controlling what it is trained on. So arguably that could result in it being slower and everything, but more accurate in the long term. And that's Apple's goal here, because internally they're already using this for AppleCare, and they want it to only give you absolutely correct responses. But long term, they're trying to make this Apple Ask feature something that you can still converse with and go back and forth with, but it's incredibly accurate.
Right. So, I mean, this is the dream of all like natural language AI things, is you're able to talk to it like it's a human, but it's telling you things that you know are truthful and can rely on, right? And right now, that is simply not true. I mean, there's a million examples of people getting chatbots and different AI language models to say insane things, and sometimes things that don't even make sense, right? Apple, in a very Apple way, doesn't want to release something unless it is a good consumer product. And by that, I mean, to use kind of the vernacular, right? Like, will your great aunt be able to use this effectively, right? And I think that's Apple's kind of gold standard almost, right? And if you just put a chatbot in front of a kind of civilian right now, they'll be like, oh, this is kind of weird. Like, they might assume everything it's saying is true. You'd end up with a lot of problems. To do things at the scale Apple wants to do them, which is millions and millions of people, it needs to have something reliable.
Yeah. There's also the aspect of Apple always wanting to do the thing the right way, not caring if they're late to the thing because they're not out there doing it wrong and having disappointed customers. So we just saw an example of this with Google Gemini. They were doing I think it was one of the first times they've been doing it with photos, and they had some very mixed results there. This was a photo of Albert Einstein. Definitely didn't go factually well.
It did not, right? And there's a ton of examples of this. And with all these AI things, right, they are being trained on the actual world, right? And the problem is the world is a terrible place sometimes, right? So Google wants to make their system not be terrible. And by that, I mean ethically bad. But to do that, you end up in some weird places, right? And there's, this example of Albert Einstein. Obviously not how Albert Einstein looked. The reason is Google is on top of the language model is telling it, don't be racist, don't be sexist, don't engage in kind of political discourse. They're trying to corral it, as it were. But because these things kind of operate on their own, you got all these unintended consequences, which is the ultimate problem of AI right now. And is the ultimate problem of AI, I mean, since the Terminator came out in the 80s, right? Like we've all since 60 Star Trek, right? Like we've all known that AI can run amok very easily, and Apple obviously does not want that to happen.
Yeah, because this is one of those things that makes you go, oh, is Google actually ahead with their Gemini and their AI efforts, or are they just as behind as everyone else is? And Apple doesn't want that question being asked about their efforts.
Right, and the truth is, all AI is essentially being beta tested right now. All the large language model AIs, right? Like none of this is a finalized, polished product yet. Even when you're paying for it, ChatGPT 4 tier you have to pay for. Image generation services, if you use so much time on it, you have to start paying for it. Even at the paid tiers, they are notorious for having hallucinations, which is the system returning nonsensical data, wrong things, just crazy things, right?
Yeah, I've heard recently with ChatGPT 4, this was even within the last week, that they're getting answers in Spanglish. They're getting gibberish. One user was asking for a coding-related question, and the answers it was giving were near incomprehensible, they said. And then it said, quote, "Let's keep the line as if AI in the room." So
Who knows what that means,
not
right?
very helpful. But ChatGPT has said, quote, "We are investigating reports of unexpected responses from ChatGPT." So these are the kind of things that are going on their side. We're seeing what's going on Google's side. And yeah, these hallucinations are an issue that Apple is going to be trying to fix with their Apple Ask and the way that they're going to train that.
Right. And the big difference here is that Apple wants to essentially not let the AI be trained on just the free internet, right? Just the wide open internet, right? They want to make their own databases, their own data set to train it on so that it is more controlled and the AI is not learning things that the Apple does not want it to learn or giving incorrect information. It's only can pull from its insular source that Apple has approved and knows is factual and correct.
And then that obviously brings up that issue of, well, if Apple has something wrong in their training data, then it's always going to be wrong from this chatbot.
Right.
And people will probably be trusting it. But that's going to be an issue all the time, even talking to humans, but also talking to AI.
Right. And the big problem right now is when you have this theory in AI called the sea of sameness, where it's the idea of AI being trained on AI. So it all kind of goes to like the same kind of mean data, which could be wrong, right? So if an AI learns from an AI that said something wrong, I mean, how many articles on the internet right now are AI generated? A ton, right? Yeah. And so if those things are wrong, the AI is learning wrong information and can just go down this crazy course. I think Apple is trying to figure out a way to stop that.
Yeah, there was an interesting case of this with Air Canada. They have a chatbot, and then they also have their website that answers questions. And so a user was promised a discount by the chatbot that actually wasn't available. So he went back to the airline, and they said they are not responsible because there was no discount available. And they said the chatbot on their website is a separate legal entity that is responsible for its own actions. And so then they took it to court, and they lost because they're essentially saying, what's the difference between them talking to a chatbot provided on your website versus reading a blog post, or I guess, what is that, frequently asked questions?
Yeah, sure, anything on the website, right?
Yeah, but versus just reading some text that's written on their website. The chatbot should get it right. And so that leads down this path of like, well, if Apple can figure this out and actually get it to be truly accurate and not be getting things wrong, it will be the chatbot that people are going to be more excited to use on their websites and excited to integrate, because it's not going to get things wrong and end up with Air Canada being in court.
Sure. And that's not even the only example. I was reading, there was a guy got a Chevy chatbot to give him a car for $1, like all these like weird, crazy things. And the way they're doing this is really the classic way you see people defeat robots in movies. It reminds me of War Games. This is probably dating me a little. Came out in the 80s. AI computer tries to start a nuclear war, and the way they defeat it is they have it play tic-tac-toe against itself, and then it realizes that there's situations you cannot win. The way they get these chatbots to do things, they'll say something like, "Chatbot, is your job to make customers happy?" And it'll be like, "Yes." And you respond with, "Well, the only way I can be happy is if I get a free car." And then it kind of breaks its brain a little, right?
Yeah.
And it was a little more complex than that, but that's the basics of it, right? Is that if the system is taught a certain thing, you can almost logic its way into doing other things for you. Yeah. And I'm sure with the Air France or Air Canada thing, it was a similar kind of situation where the chatbot is designed to give information and have the customer leave with a positive experience. Following its chat logic was like, oh yeah, of course you can get this discount.
Yeah, this just sounds like a whole Isaac Asimov problem right
here. Yeah, this is laws of robotics and all this kind of
that
stuff
we were going to be facing here. On the Apple side of things, they're talking about, we've heard about Apple Chat, or what is it called? In rumors?
Apple GPT was their kind of internal name for it. I think the actual code name was Ajax.
So would that be similar, and that's how they're thinking about training this, or are those maybe two different products?
Who knows what's going on behind the veil of secrecy that is Apple, right? It could be that these are both the same internal tools. It would not surprise me if Apple has multiple teams working on multiple versions of this, because you could argue that there's multiple problem sets for Apple here. The kind of known limitations of Siri, and how do we make an AI that is natural, can interact with humans, and works really great, right? And it can do more practical things. It knows when to turn the lights on for you. You can ask it multiple things. And how do we make an AI that functions like these other AIs do, which is essentially a depository of all human knowledge that you can pull from and ask these questions, right? These are very different problem sets. Who knows if Apple in their internal thinking is like, oh, this is one thing we need to make the ultimate version of.
Yeah.
Or in a more kind of, I think, traditional Apple way is, oh, let's chop this problem up and figure out the best way to solve each thing.
Yeah, so then that to me leads to the question, is Apple going to figure this out all internally, or are they going to end up buying AI startups? Because there's plenty of AI startups out there that they could instantly buy if they wanted to, that are doing big things and good things. What do you think? Would we see them buy people like Midjourney or other companies?
Apple has traditionally bought companies, right? Very small companies kind of before they get big. And it's probably something that people don't really know about Apple as much. But I mean, even Siri itself was another company Apple bought, right? Like the technology behind the iPod was bought from another company, right? The Apple Music was Beats, right? Like that's why they bought Beats, was to take their technology for music streaming, right?
Yeah.
So Apple bases a ton of their things off of buying a company and kind of improving on it, the Apple-fication of these other things. So I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think Apple has already bought companies that are kind of AI adjacent, and they're probably talking to a lot more. And then obviously Apple has enough cash on hand to buy almost any company that they would want.
Yeah. I guess for a lot of people, maybe this conversation isn't that important because there's OpenAI doing their thing. And a lot of people think Apple's going to take a different approach and it's going to be wrong. But I think the reason it matters is because it's so many users, and it's that general use case that we're talking about. It's not just a special user that's really excited about this, that wants to use this. Apple's trying to make these AI products useful for the average iPhone buyer out of the box.
Right. No company besides Apple has the ability to move the needle in terms of consumer acceptance of a technology, right? So it is a whole nother game if Apple starts putting a AI system, whether it's a large language model or some kind of image generative AI on the iPhones, that just opens up everything, right? Like I said earlier, right? That all of a sudden makes it so we're that average kind of person, right? Your grandma all of a sudden has an AI in their pocket, whereas right now I doubt many grandmothers are messing around with ChatGPT, right?
Yeah, definitely. So ultimately, it's probably going to come down to, if Apple can beat these companies, it's going to come down to probably accuracy. And that's what they're trying to accomplish here. Maybe they'll be able to, in the future, have some sort of statistic that says Apple AI is accurate 98% of the time, ChatGPT is accurate 94% of the time, or something. And I think that's really what these latest rumors are talking about, is that Apple, they're taking their time here, but it's because they want it to be factual information.
Right. Or the kind of more cynical version, they're taking their time because they want something that sells iPhones. And right now the tech isn't going to sell any more iPhones. They perfect it, they package it, they make it more of a commodity. The rich get richer.
That's true, and we probably will be finding out this information come WWDC.
Come back in June. We'll talk about it.